Hey y'all, welcome to the second sidebar of season 3. I'm sure y'all seeing a pattern, but if not, I'll call it out. Well, I think I've already said it, but all of these sidebars are strategically placed into segments, always making sure to be a bit of a beginning and an end of something. To recap, the last sidebar covered episodes 1 through 5. In those episodes, we were able to see how David came along and pulled Shelonda out of her rut. He distracted her enough to the point that she wasn't crying over Antonio all day. He basically gave her a reason to do something different. But at the same time, you realize that he had started to shape her into a different person. David introduces Shelonda as Shelly, starting the process of her deluding herself. He disappears for a few weeks, making her wonder if she's done something wrong. And when he resurfaces, she's more than happy to forget all about the somewhat weird things that she probably should have paid attention to, like the fact that she was most likely drugged. That was where the last sidebar ended. So, now we have to move to another segment of their relationship, because that's how this works. Let's call this phase the crazy dating. Episode 6. Ooh, the proposition. Shelonda and David have basically just been hanging out for 6 months. She no longer has the burden of not fitting in, but their situation is really just stagnant. They haven't even kissed. As far as Shelonda is concerned, their situation is just enough to keep her mind off of everything else. But on some random Friday, David decides to change things. He calls her and they exchange their typical greeting. Sidebar. The fact that it had become their typical greeting says a lot. Shelonda always starts the conversation with the same salutation. She says, hello, and David responds with, hi, it's David. But the part that's important to note is the fact that Shelonda has become completely complicit in her delusion. After David says, hi, it's David, she responds with, hi, David, it's Shelly. Not Shelonda, but Shelly. She's on board with it now. But back to the story. David tells Shelonda that he wants them to go on a solo date for the first time, and she agrees. Also for the first time, Shelonda considers the fact that there could be something deeper between the two of them, and he says he'll be there by 7 o'clock so they can be at the restaurant by 7:30. Shelonda spiffies herself up, and she's ready when David gets there at 6:55. David arrives with purple orchids, her favorites. She throws on her shoes and they head to the car. Now here's where it gets weird. They're in the car and David turns to Shelonda and tells her that she looks pretty. But then he adds something else. He says, I need you to understand something, Shelly. I am a stickler for being on time. I believe that time is money, and I intend to stay rich. Shelonda hits him with a small, that's good to know, type of business, and he says, keep that in mind. Shelonda is weirded out because she looks at the clock in the car and it's 7:03. Keep in mind that David called her at 5 o'clock and altered their plan, fully expecting her to be ready at 7 o'clock. He showed up at 6:55 and she was ready. Yet this conversation is taking place at 7:03. The conversation is not taking place like through a bathroom door because she's not ready. They're literally sitting in the car already. Shelonda internalizes it for a second and then decides she must be tripping. There's no way he's accusing her of hindering the process of them not being on time. So she lets it go. That was her first introduction to David's time complex. They get to the restaurant where Shelonda is introduced to something else. David's reaction to disrespect. The hostess addressed David as Mr. Herkowitz, and Shelonda is triggered. It makes her think of Antonio, because that's what he called David, but she snaps out of it. And she notices that the hostess quickly assesses and dismisses her. The hostess only addresses David and asks if he'll be requiring special seating arrangements. Sidebar. Yes, I'm fully aware that it would not happen this way in real life. The hostess would be the friendly face up front. She would not also be the person that was taking their orders. But for dramatic effect, I needed her to be. So mind your business. Back to the episode. Since David feels that the hostess was dismissive toward Shelonda, he decides to create a stance. He says, "This is Shelley. She is my date. From this point forward, all arrangements will be handled through her. You can ask her where she'd like to sit. And could you hurry, please? She doesn't like to eat after 8. Which is crazy because they obviously get there at 7:30. But anyway, the hostess is embarrassed. She does as she's told. And David goes out of his way to make it as uncomfortable as possible. So, hostess girl brings the food back. Shelonda's like, "Lord, I hope she ain't spitting this." But David decides that it's time to get down to the intended purpose of the date. In the book, I said that you may want to skip over this part if you're triggered. And I only mean that from an audacity perspective because David simply does not present well in this instance. David tells Shelonda that he's getting older and he's looking for a relationship. He's looking for some very specific things and he feels that she might fit. But he wants her to think about some things. And in thinking about those things, she has to compare herself and her life to him and his life. But there's one thing that can close that gap: cooperation. David said that he can upgrade Shelonda's appearance, wardrobe, housing, and transportation, take her out to any fancy restaurant, on any vacation, to all the extravagant parties, introduce her to everyone who's anyone, and put her in a position to be one of the most powerful women in the city. It will just require some cooperation on her end. The cooperation: 1. You must agree to enter into a pre-relationship with me. You will allow me to court you exclusively for the purposes of exposing you to the life that I can provide for you. You will not date anyone else. You will attend dinners and functions with me, and you will look the part. 2. If that goes well, you will be required to go back to school. I will pay for a program of your choosing so long as it meets my standards. Additionally, I would like for you to lose some weight. Not much, maybe 10 to 15 pounds. I messed that up in the recording. It should have said 10 to 15 pounds. I think I said 5, and then I said 10 to 15. I don't know, but it was supposed to say 10 to 15. So that's what it is. 3. If these conditions are completed to my satisfaction, it will be decided that we will become an official couple. Now, this is why I said that David doesn't present well in this instance. David and Shelonda have been seeing each other for 6 months. Yet, he presents this situation as something that's purely transactional. He's like, "Hey, I'm looking for someone because it's about that time. You look like a good fit, but not quite good enough. And I want you to look at yourself and look at me. Now compare us." And while that might seem like a good upgrade to a lot of people, I see it quite differently. A person who feels that they're dating down to that degree and makes the other person acknowledge it will likely feel leveraged, especially if they were the one that had to pull the other person up. Which leads to the next part, the cooperation. She has to be in a pre-relationship with him on a trial basis. And if that goes well, she will be required to go back to school for something that he agrees with, and she has to lose weight. And if she does those things, it will be decided that they will become a couple. He will always decide if she has met the mark. So she always has the burden of having to be good enough. And if you think about it, with everything that he has going for him, why wouldn't he just go out and find somebody who already has those things? Because creating that person, creates leverage. And that's why I said it's a trigger. That's a lot of manipulation under the ruse of upgrading a person's life. But David sweetens the pot by telling her that he's not offering her anything that she wouldn't do for her own self if she were able. And basically tells her to sleep on it. He tells her that he basically expects a decision by the following Friday. Her decision will determine whether they'll meet at the bar or somewhere that's worthy of the relationship that he's trying to build with her. Either way, he expects her to be at whatever place at 7 o'clock. They leave, and David awkwardly watches Shelonda sing "Where the Broken Hearts Go" when it comes on the radio. He seems a bit bothered, and that's that. When she's alone, Shelonda starts to contemplate David's proposition. and she realizes that she wants everything that he has offered to her. She says, what's the worst case scenario? The situation doesn't go as planned. That could happen in any relationship, right? Episode 7, Decision Time. As the days go by without Shelonda hearing from David, she begins to wonder if she may have thrown him off. It's never a good thing when Shelonda has too much time to consider things. She goes the entire week pondering over all the details. But then Friday rolls around. Shelonda does her normal thing, nail salon and such. She falls asleep after cleaning her house and is awakened by the sound of her phone ringing. It's David. He tells her that he didn't call her all week because he didn't want to influence her decision. But now it's time for her to make a decision. Shelonda quickly says that she'll see him at 7, based on the fact that he told her the week before that 7 would be the time. Keep in mind that it was nearly 6 o'clock when he called her, a tight standard by any measure. But Shelonda is ready by 6:45, avoiding the uncomfortable time-related conversation that they had the week prior. From that point, they start to date very heavily. David basically gave Shelonda an itinerary at the beginning of every week, and she complies. She accompanied him wherever he asked and looked the part, just as their arrangement mandated. The seeds were being planted with Shelonda. She was in the company of David and everyone in his circle. She began to realize how she was expected to behave, and she took it all in. None of the people would really have been her choice of company, but she realized that she was being exposed to real power, and she liked that. What she didn't like was the fact that she was often faced with difficulties as a result of being in an interracial relationship. She states that many people felt that their relationship seemed to be a slight against them because they felt that David should have chosen someone of their status. Typically, David ain't play about her though. He would basically put anybody in their place. But then there was the day that she thought he wouldn't. Shelonda meets David at a restaurant where he's also meeting potential clients. Why was she there? I don't know. It's not like she was a part of his business. She wasn't a lawyer. It made for good dramatics in the story though, right? But anyway, Shelonda caught the vibe immediately. So she felt like she knew what type of night it was going to be. The clients took turns delivering racial insults. The first guy asked why she hadn't ordered the watermelon martini because he thought her people love watermelon. Shelonda brushed it off because she didn't want to affect David's business. Then it was the next guy's turn. Shelonda ordered a seafood dish, and he asked if she'd like fried chicken instead. Now, I'm going to be honest. Business or not, either me or my man would have had to handle it. Forget that deal. Somebody would have had to say something. Now, I would have given him the chance to say something first, but it wouldn't have been but so many of them. But anyway, David said nothing. It wasn't until one of the clients mentioned Shelonda's past life as Star that David's lines finally got crossed. At that point, he basically said, hey, look, this is my girlfriend. This ain't what you're going to do because I got some dirt on you too. Cheating on your wife with a black girl. So we going to do business, or do I got to tell your wife? And then David made him reset the clock. He made him get up and reintroduce himself to Shelonda like he was making him erase everything that happened that evening. The client agreed to have David be their legal representation, but because David needed to make a point, he asked Shelonda if he should agree to represent them. And Shelonda played right along. She was like, yes, but let's not waste any more time with these people. And then David made them pay for their meals. Afterwards, Shelonda realized that David had worked outside of his order of operations. He skipped to the girlfriend phase before making her go to school and such. But at that point, it had been decided that they were in a relationship by David. Episode 8, How Audacious. After dinner, David takes Shelonda to an amazing high-rise apartment. She gets inside, and she's like, ooh, this is nice. David turns to face her, and he's all like, you deserve the best, right? Shelonda gives him this huge hug and feels like it's going to be awkward afterwards. But as she's attempting to disconnect, he pulls her in and kisses her for the first time. They've been seeing each other for 6 months and never even kissed. Yet, David has decided that they have entered into a relationship on that day. He gives her this soft and gentle kiss. And under most circumstances, she should have had to wring her panties out. Yet, she felt nothing, not a thing. Then he tells her that he has arranged for her to meet an interior designer the next day. How audacious. Why? Well, let me tell you. For him to have set that appointment, he had to have known that he was going to set the standard and that she was going to go with it. He was going to say that they were in a relationship that day and she was going to say yes. He was going to tell her that she lived in that apartment that day and she was going to say yes. That's what was going to happen. Imagine just assuming that you have that much control over another person's life. That really is audacious. But Shelonda makes an exceptional point. Why shouldn't he have had those assumptions? She hadn't ever resisted anything. He gave her a schedule at the beginning of the week and she showed up. She agreed to be in a pre-relationship with him. So, yeah. Anyway, they continue to tour this apartment holding hands. She admits that it feels like they're playing a role. She knows the difference. Think about how she felt when she held hands with Antonio for the first time. They were on their first date. They went to a seafood place. And when they held hands, it felt like fireworks. It was nothing like that. She held David's hand because he held hers. They go to the parking garage where he introduces her to her brand new pearl white Mercedes and the best parking spot in human existence. He told her that getting groceries up would be a bit of a hassle, but he'd have someone do it for her. She drives the car around. She gets the feeling of that type of luxury and she's just like, man, I deserve this. When they get back to the garage, she hands David the keys and he's like, nah, this is all yours now. I'm going to get somebody to help you dispose of everything else in your old life. In a moment of sensibility, Shelonda decides to keep the details of her housing situation a secret. And she'll just keep the Jaguar that Antonio bought her at her grandmother's house. She names her new car Simone because why not? David goes into his pocket and gives Shelonda an itinerary, indicating that he's already planned out the details of her acceptance. He has planned her entire next day, from breakfast with him in the morning, meetings with an image consultant, nutritionist, personal trainers, and interior designer. Lastly, he'd be at her new apartment at 7 o'clock to pick her up for dinner. And he requests that she's on time for all of it. Episode 9, Envy of Our Friends. David did everything he said he was going to do. The interior designer made her place amazing. Shelonda worked with the nutritionist and the personal trainer. And being overly ambitious, she lost 25 pounds, more than the 10 to 15 that was required by David. The image consultant overhauled her entire look. David wanted her to wear her hair either straight or with a slight wave pattern because no one in her new circle wore braids. It's crazy because if you think back to the beginning of this season, the My Guide chapter starts with Shelonda getting ready for her date. She describes how beautifully she's dressed and how a considerable amount of effort was placed into getting the wave pattern into her hair. Now you realize that it was at David's insistence. She let go of her signature nail art that reminded her of Antonio in the hierarchy. But she felt like she was being rewarded by fitting in. David got her breasts redone. Remember, Antonio got them done the first time. Even with the crazy schedule, Shelonda finished the accounting program in record time, and David helped her get a job with one of the most credible companies in their city. He helped her to become one of the most influential women, just as he said he'd do. Shelonda learns that Mandy and Tina aren't as professionally credible as she thought they were, which presents an opportunity for David to start taking credit for her success. He does this in a subtle manner, saying things like, "That's why I paid for you to go to the best school so you won't be like them," or some variation thereof. That's impactful for Shelonda for a couple of reasons. On one hand, she feels that she has worked hard, so having him take the credit is bothersome. But on the other hand, keep in mind that David knows a bit about her. He knows that she used to say she works in finance prior to ever going to school. A part of her probably would feel the relief that she no longer has to participate in that fraud, like she doesn't have to pad it anymore. But whether she's bothered or not, she manages to balance it all out because he never displays that in public. When they're around other people, he acts like she's the best thing ever, and that means a lot to her. Shelonda learns about the relationship dynamics of the legal group. She learns that Chad is always cheating on Mandy, which results in Mandy making alterations to herself to meet his mark. Even so, he's upfront about the fact that he will never marry her. She suspects that Sean is abusing Tina, even though she hasn't seen it with her own eyes. She has, however, seen bruises and heard the ridiculous excuses that Tina has come up with to justify them. She realizes that Sean gives Tina a 1-hour time limit to be out, even if it means that she won't have time to eat her food, and she's only allowed to associate with people of Chad's choosing. Of Sean's choosing. Mix couples up. Shelonda expresses her bother over these situations to David, but David creates a stance that they will not be involved in their friends' relationships. Episode 10, Security. It's 5 years in, and Shelonda gets the obligatory bouquet of purple orchids that David has given her on every first date anniversary since they met. He's predictable, so she knows there'll be a card. But this year, he wants to do something different. Every time David wants to do something different, something crazy happens. But anyway, he asks her to meet him at his office at 10 o'clock. Thinking about it, she's already at her office, so it was probably like 9 o'clock. I guess she just showed up to work, left her little calculator on her desk, and went to his office. I don't know. I didn't think that through. But anyway, she gets there at 9:45 because his office is obviously in her office's basement and there's no traffic. But the point I was trying to make was she was aware of his time complex and she didn't want to cut it too close. They leave and drive for like 15 minutes and then they approach a large garage. Shelonda was like, a car. David has given her 3 cars in 5 years, so she wasn't impressed. But as they drive around and the door opens, she realizes that it's not a car, it's an airplane. And Shelonda is like, is this ours? And David is like, no, sweetheart, it's yours. Shelonda runs up to the plane and sees pretty purple lettering on the side. It says, Shelly. Sidebar. A lot of my music played out too long in this season. I was recording and I thought I had timed it out perfectly. But I said, prominently displayed on the side was one word, Shelly. And that music just kept going. I rolled with it though because why not? Moving right along. They got on the plane and Shelonda realizes that they're going on a surprise trip and that everything has been handled. And that's what solidified her security with David. She realized that she could always depend on him to handle everything and that she'd never have to wonder if things were done the right way. She recounts her issues with her previous relationships, and she feels that David far exceeds what she would ever have been able to have with either of the other ones. On the plane ride, David asked Shelonda if she could have had anything in the world, what would it be? She says, Cassidy. And to make him understand why that's so important, she dumps all the details of her life. David handles it like he handles everything else. He basically says he'll make it happen, even if he has to coerce Shelonda's mom into giving them guardianship by airing her dirty laundry. Shelonda hasn't ever seen David operate that way in a personal setting, but she balances it out because she feels that it's worth it to get Cassidy. Episode 11, This Means Forever. The plane lands, and they're in Belize. Sidebar. Belize wasn't exactly a part of the original storyline. I mean, the general idea was there, But something happened that altered the why and how, or the how and why of the situation. If you know me personally, I always say that I don't watch TV heavily when I write because my mind does weird things. This is a perfect example of why. It ended up being a good thing, but it was an alteration nonetheless. I was in the process of writing this, and my mind was going along just in this linear route. I was watching this show one day. It's called Island Life. On this show, this couple went out to Belize in search of an uninhabited plot of land to buy. People thought they were crazy because it was so much work, but they saw the end goal because of the lush greenery, the fruit trees, and like this wonderful island breeze. My crazy Chinney brain picked it right up. David and Shelonda had landed somewhere else in everything. I erased that entire chapter in lieu of them landing in Belize, just so I could make them buy that island in the coming storyline. So they were always going to meet Juanita, but she wasn't going to be Juanita. She was going to be somebody from another country because they were originally supposed to go somewhere else. But that storyline just spoke to me after I watched that show. And if you've ever talked to me about storylines, you know my mind would just start creating stuff and it'll just go. After it was understood that they'd meet Juanita in Belize, my mind immediately created who she was going to be in this story. Long story short, that's why I don't watch a lot of TV when I write. Okay, back to the story. They land in Belize and meet Juanita. They get to the casita and Shelonda realizes that David already has their luggage in the room. They take a shower and Shelonda looks into her suitcase. She realizes that he expects her to be nearly nude and she's like, "What's this?" David turns to her and says, "Now you listen to me now. Listen, Monday, you're going to be a bank teller. But tonight, you're a bootlegger with a truckload of Mississippi's finest and a fistful of cash." Wrong movie. Y'all, that's from life. That's my favorite movie ever. But anyway, the sentiment's the same. The sentiment is the same. Follow me. David says, "Look at yourself, Shelley. You're beautiful. We're beautiful. Next week, you can go home. We can go home and be lawyers and accountants. But this week we are Belize. We are amidst the beautiful people. Let's do as the beautiful people do." Shelonda's not really comfortable, so he gives her a little netted covering. She watches David put his shorts on, and for the first time, she's like, "Dang, my man is fine." She describes David as being average height, olive skin, curly brown hair, and an amazing body. In my mind, he looked like a young Matthew McConaughey, the young one, not the one now. They leave the casita, and for the first time, Shelonda understands David's push to have them be perfect. She realizes that they aren't just amongst the beautiful people, but they are the beautiful people. They go to a restaurant. They've been out all day, and Shelonda is exhausted. She asks David if they can leave, and he says, "Of course, but there's something that I need to do first." David gets down onto one knee, and he says, "Shelley, you are everything that I've ever wanted in a woman, and I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't seize this opportunity. There isn't anyone in this world that I would rather have by my side until the day that I die. Will you marry me?" Strange verbiage. Shelonda is over the moon, jumping up and down. She says, "Yes." She tries to kiss David, but due to his exacting nature, he needs to make sure that she repeats the verbiage that he finds essential. David makes Shelonda specifically state that this means forever and that she promises to be by his side until the day that he dies. That was day one. She repeats it. That's day one. On day two, they stay in and Juanita cooks for them. They exchange conversation with Juanita, and she excludes the parts of her life that she feels don't reflect well upon her and David. After they finish eating, David asks if they can share something together because he wants to share all of his experience with her. And what is it? Drugs. Shelonda, a girl who wouldn't even really drink one time, is now willing to pop a pill. Anyway, they get high and have sex with Juanita. That happens 4 more times over the course of that week. Episode 12, She's Ours. David is exacting, so he wants to get married on the anniversary of their engagement, which is also the anniversary of their first date. That gives them 1 year to plan an elaborate and over-the-top wedding. They pause the pursuit of Cassidy until after the wedding, citing that they'll look more credible as a married couple. The wedding is amazing, and David and Shelonda look like the perfect couple. At some point, Shelonda goes to the bathroom where she encounters Tina. Tina's crying. Upon investigating, she realizes that Tina has gotten beaten pretty severely by Sean. Having been abused in the past, Shelonda is livid. She tells Tina, and I quote, "I told her that she doesn't deserve to be abused. I told her not to be afraid to step away from situations that no longer served her purpose. I told her that everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be free." And then she leaves the bathroom, talking herself out of slapping Sean. After the wedding, David and Shelonda leave for their honeymoon. They arrive at her plane, which whisks them away. She's excited, knowing that David is going to go above and beyond. Instead, she finds that they're in Belize again. Not that she didn't enjoy it the first time, but a repeat trip. That was a bit below David's standards, especially for their honeymoon. Then she sees Juanita and soon realizes that this isn't a simple repeat trip. David has purchased an entire island for them, thanks to my island life viewing practices. Everything on the island is catered to them. And instead of having the rustic casita from the year prior, David has had them an amazing dwelling built. It's more than Shelonda could ever have dreamt of. Shelonda is excited because she has spent a year with the mundane day-to-day operations with her life with David. But now they're back in Belize and looking forward to an adventurous David that seems to come out when he isn't under the world's watchful eye. They commence to being pill poppers. As a result, they walk around the island totally naked because they're high. They spend 2 weeks being naked, high, and in a joint relationship with Juanita. When it's time to leave, Shelonda jokingly asks if they can keep Juanita, to which David responds, "Sure, why not?" Conveniently, Juanita already has gained U.S. citizenship, because why wouldn't she? They all agree that everyone will win because Juanita can help out around the house and be live-in help with Cassidy. And then they can supply her with a better life than what she has in Belize. And just like that is settled, Juanita agrees to go back with David and Shelonda. So that's the end of this sidebar. The next episode is called Emotional Snapback. As I stated at the beginning of this sidebar, these are all broken down into segments. This was the dating and eventual marriage of David and Shelonda. What comes next will be a whole different turn in the relationship between these two. I'll let some more build up, and we'll discuss it on the next sidebar with Chinney. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome.